I'm sick of hiding the fact that Eurylochus is one of my favorite characters in Epic the Musical, and every time I see massive slander against him, I feel like it's unbased. I feel like every time people talk about hating him, they don't hate Odysseus. Before you guys start coming for me in the comment section, I am not saying he did not make a mistake. Opening the wind bag was a mistake. I am not excusing that. I want to get that out of the way first. But it's why he opened the wind bag and the subsequent rest of the story that I find people are ignoring. First, we have to understand motivations of Eurylochus. I know you guys don't want to do it, but hear me out. He says in Full Speed Ahead that he has concerns about supplies and food and what we're going to do. He feels this desire to protect his men, to feed them, to take care of them. And he says in a lot of situations that there is no cost too great to fill out this expectation. As a good second in command, he turns to Odysseus to answer these questions. Our people are starving. Odysseus, what can we do? And Odysseus tells them, look where the birds fly, they'll lead us to land, right? He basically tells them that they'll be able to get food if they follow the birds. And this is explicitly Odysseus's plan for solving Eurylochus's concerns. And because Eurylochus trusts him, he accepts it. When they listen to Odysseus and get to land, that is when the disagreement starts. The first thing that Eurylochus says is, yeah, we need to basically pillage this place. We need to get enough supplies for our people. There's a lot of us. We need to just take what we can, right? Which is very cynical and very, very evil, I would say. I'd give you that. Maybe not evil, but maybe misguided. But Odysseus disagrees. He basically says, no, we should side with sort of like the polities approach. We should go out and see what we can get without hurting anyone, without pillaging. And then if we can't find anything or we find people who fight us back, then we can pillage, right? So Eurylochus accepts this. This seems like a good compromise. It makes a lot of sense. He trusts Odysseus. But how does this end, right? They go to this area, they do the polities approach, and they basically run into the lotus eaters, which are something that they can't consume. And then they run into Polyphemus and his cows, right? Like, so this is the worst case scenario. So Eurylochus sees that. He's not dumb. He's like, I told you we should just pillage and take what we need. But instead, we end up following the approach of being non-pillagey. And we ended up outmatched, outmanned, all this stuff. We should have just came in with full force. And ultimately, a lot of people die, including Polites, because of this decision. I'm not saying that Eurylochus is right in this situation, but he has a good concern. And he sees how Odysseus's perspective fails. We start to see Eurylochus start to question everything that Odysseus sort of does because this whole situation seems to be caused by his decisions, as he should as second in command. He should look to Odysseus to solve the problems. And now they're dealing with these Cyclopses and there's more of them. They're outmatched. What are they supposed to do? But because of Odysseus's quick thinking and calling himself nobody, the Cyclopses go away. And the whole time you see the tension between Eurylochus and Odysseus as Eurylochus says, we should run, we should get out of here. And Odysseus is like, no, I want to see my plan work out, which puts them in a weird position where Odysseus ends up being right? But Eurylochus felt like it might have been luck. Like he's constantly risking everyone's lives on a gambit. We're going to go into the real mistake that Odysseus makes, right? He leaves Polyphemus alive. Even Athena says, kill the Cyclops. That's a bigger problem. And Eurylochus doesn't really have comments on this section, but I think it's important that he witnesses this, which is that Odysseus goes one step further from just leaving the Cyclops alive. He announces himself. He basically says, I am Odysseus. And we see this as being relevant because the exact line he tells Polyphemus ends up being the exact line that Poseidon uses after he completely destroys everyone on the ship, except for I think 43 men. So when we get to Luck's run out, it makes so much sense. Everything that Odysseus has done has gone poorly, but worked out ultimately. But in the end, right, like, he's like worried that the choices that Odysseus makes are not in the best interest for everyone. He kind of realizes what Odysseus realizes later in Monster, that his kindness is actually a weakness, and he keeps trying to point it out. How does Odysseus respond to Eurylochus's concerns, rightful concerns about the way that Odysseus makes decisions? He basically says, he brags, he's like, I got through the war completely without any man dying. And he says this in front of everyone, right? And he says that if you have any other concerns, we can talk about it privately. Then when they get to private, right, like Odysseus is like, you can't keep questioning me in front of all these people because of morale. We need to have trust on me because I'm the best person to run this ship. And Eurylochus doesn't disagree with this. He's like, yeah, you're the smartest. You did do this sort of thing. But he has concerns. But Odysseus is basically telling him to shut up, right? Stop bringing concerns, which is not great because now Eurylochus doesn't really trust Odysseus and he's not bringing those concerns to him anymore. Let's get to the big mistake. So Odysseus gets the wing bag from Aeolus, which again, Eurylochus fights him tooth and nail, basically saying it's crazy that we even gambited with this place in the sky. He doesn't even agree that it's even Aeolus, but Odysseus gets the bag and he comes back and people start getting rumors that it's treasure. And Odysseus is trying to clamp down on those rumors. Because of this, it creates like this weird scenario, right? Where Odysseus is telling his men to trust him and they're like, we can't trust you because you've led us astray with your kindness and we've lost so many people because of it. How can we trust you? At this point, Poseidon hasn't happened yet. So they don't know the full extent of this decision, but they do know that they can't really trust him. So Eurylochus, echoing all these feelings, he opens the wind bag. I am going to hear you. Yes, this is a mistake. I think he's completely in the wrong. Why would you open it for treasure? Your people are starving. You've been at sea forever. Why do you care if Odysseus is hiding treasure? But it was the fact that he felt that he couldn't trust him. He felt that he needed to know for certain what was in that bag to see if Odysseus is worth trusting. This is where he sort of becomes my favorite character because I have sympathy for this. I understand why you would be distrustful of a person who's not communicating openly with you, who makes these decisions that leads to your friends dying. You can't even bury your friends. You're constantly in this state of panic. You haven't been home for a long time. You're worried. You're freaked out. I can understand why he's like this. And I can understand it's still his responsibility for his mistake. What he does ultimately creates a huge problem for them and they're not able to get home. Granted, Odysseus started the problem first and Eurylochus made it worse, but still he's responsible for those actions. So I understand why people hate him. However, why don't we hate Odysseus with the same fervor? I know he's the main character of the story, but he's the one who actually messes things up multiple times. Telling Polyphemus his name is literally what led to all his friends dying to Poseidon. But I don't see any Odysseus slander online. I see, oh, Odysseus is great, Eurylochus sucks, all of this online. And he's actually the real reason and ultimately the reason throughout the entire story why everyone dies except for him. All his decisions led to his entire team dying. Next point I want to make is that the writing for this musical is so clever because Eurylochus is Odysseus's foil. We see a transition between these characters' ideals and their behaviors throughout the story, right? Eurylochus is very motivated by the whole, right? Making small sacrifices for the greater of the whole. And Odysseus wants to save every person. Each individual is valuable to him. And then we see this shift. We see a change between the ideals of these characters throughout the rest of the story. Odysseus' kindness starts to rub off on Eurylochus. And what we see is that Eurylochus is guilty about opening the wind bag. He actually feels very apologetic. He realizes it's a mistake and he wants to come forward with it and he tries to tell Odysseus. But Odysseus does what he always does when Eurylochus brings a concern. He waves it away. He ignores it. He basically tells him, this is not the time or place to be talking about our feelings. And because Eurylochus deep down inside feels that he's justified for having distrusted Odysseus in the first place, kind of disagrees and keeps it to himself. This transition to a more empathetic Eurylochus is not quick. So when we see them interact with Circe, Odysseus is still pretty compassionate. He doesn't want to leave these separate men behind. He wants to save everyone that they have left. And they fight about it. Eurylochus is like, no, we need to run away. We need to save the people that we have left. We just have to let these 4 or 5 people go. And they go back and forth. And ultimately, because of the compassion that's rubbing off on Eurylochus, he understands Odysseus's point of view and he accepts it. He realizes that in the past, disagreeing with Odysseus led to catastrophe. So he's like broken because he's seen Odysseus fail and he's seen Odysseus succeed and he doesn't really know what to do. So he brings up his concerns and then accepts Odysseus's plan. Now we get to the song that actually changes the dynamic between Eurylochus and Odysseus. Odysseus becomes aware of how his compassion for individual people has led to the downfall of the majority, right? He learns in Monster, he learns in different beasts that sacrifices need to be made, sort of what Eurylochus has been saying from the very, very beginning. And he is talking about how his compassion is lost. But at the same time, in the background, not necessarily in the songs themselves, but reflected later in how Eurylochus behaves, is this softening where he's like, no, individual people do matter. Our goal is not more important than the people that we lose along the way. Then we get to Scylla. This is solidifying Odysseus as the monster, the person willing to sacrifice everything for his goal. And he sort of gets this confession from Eurylochus. Eurylochus can't hold it in anymore. He has to confess because he realizes that he was wrong all along. Odysseus's compassion was actually right. And he was like, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have gone against you. And this song is the song where Odysseus does exactly what Eurylochus has been saying and just sacrifices a few people to get them home. This kind of ruthlessness is what springs Mutiny, which is my favorite song in the entire musical. Well, maybe Just a Man, then Mutiny, but I feel like this is the turning point. This is the exact moment where we see these stories converge, right? Eurylochus is fighting on the side of we shouldn't have sacrificed 6 people for the greater good, and we've got Odysseus saying that's the only way we're gonna get home. This conversation about right or wrong and the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people is the final switch between the two, and we get an actual fight. What I love so much about Mutiny is that Eurylochus wants to believe that Odysseus is a good person, that he is not the kind of person that Eurylochus was at the start of the story. He wants to know that Odysseus didn't do this on purpose. He's like begging him. He's like, you were the good one. You were the one fighting for the greatest, preserving each individual person. Tell me it's not true. Say something. And Odysseus can't because he is, in fact, the monster now. He is the person willing to sacrifice all these people for the greater good. Eurylochus is having this crisis because he agrees with Odysseus from the beginning of the story and has to fight his own ideals later on in the story. He has to fight himself. And that is why it ultimately becomes the downfall of Eurylochus. He fights Odysseus, the mutiny happens, but ultimately Odysseus and Eurylochus at the beginning was right. If they wanted to get home, they had to sacrifice people. And that is the tough part of this story, why ultimately in the end Eurylochus was right, and then we hear all these people saying that he's wrong, that there's no reason he should be this way, and Odysseus is the same. He's the same person at the end that Eurylochus was at the beginning. It's this moral conundrum from the very beginning. All the reasons why people hated Eurylochus are the reasons why Odysseus gets home in the end. Odysseus is the villain. He is the monster by the end of the story. That's the whole point. That's why all the monsters in the story have a name. And at the end, when Odysseus kills all those men in his town, the song is called Odysseus. He is the monster. We're not supposed to agree with his methods. Eurylochus dies changing his mind. And that's the thing that upsets me about all this hatred for him. Yes, he made a mistake, but Odysseus did too. And at the end of the story, the person we should agree with is Eurylochus, but we don't get that. And I don't know. I just needed to get that off my chest. Tell me what you guys think.